Okay, so thank you all for being here today. We're super excited that you're all joining us for this lunchtime session. My name is Anna Guida, and I'm the project coordinator for Empower Idaho. We're super excited for this webinar with Dr. Joel Lane. I'm going to do a quick introduction for him and then just kind of let him get started so we can use that full hour. So Dr. Joel Lane is an associate professor and interim department chair for the Counselor Education Department at Portland State University. He joined Portland State in 2013 after completing his doctorate in counselor education at Oakland University in the Detroit, Michigan area. His research interests involve life transitions and mental health in emerging adulthood. He has published 12 peer-reviewed journal articles on the subject that have been cited nearly 100 times in total. He is the past president of the Oregon Counseling Association and is actively involved in professional advocacy at the state and national levels. So we just want to thank him once again for being here today. And so I'm going to pop off, but if you guys need to ask some questions, there's a chat box in the little control panel. Feel free to ask Dr. Joel questions throughout, as well as at the end. And he'll be keeping an eye on that, and I will too. So thanks again. Handing it over to you.
Great, thank you. So I'm just going to get my slides going, and thank you, Anna, for that warm introduction. Good day, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. I noticed I was just kind of looking through the attendee list, and I saw that one of my former students is logged in. So hi, Annette. It's good to see you logged in. So we are going to be talking about college student mental health today. I want to share some information kind of geared specifically to college students. So, you know, if you're a college student, maybe you'll find this information helpful. If you're somebody who works with college students, perhaps this would be information that you could, you know, find helpful in terms of sharing with the folks that you work with. My presentation style, I like to be interactive, and I know that a webinar maybe isn't always the most conducive environment for interactive, you know, kind of like during the presentation. But I'd love for you to add questions or comments throughout the talk. There will be a few times where I will specifically kind of pause and ask for your input. So please be ready to type some thoughts and don't hesitate to share your perspectives. And then we'll also have time at the end specifically for questions as well. So without further ado, I will kind of proceed with the slides here. So I wanted to just kind of share a little bit about me. One of my values as an educator is that it's important for us to kind of know where the information is coming from, and I want you to sort of know sort of the different ways that I have engaged with the topic of college student mental health professionally and personally. So prior to starting as a faculty member, I think I'm in my 6th year now here at Portland State University. I worked quite a bit with college age populations in various contexts. I had a private practice as a psychotherapist for a few years in the Detroit, Michigan area, where I worked mostly with young adults, adolescents, and some young children. I also did some academic advising in a university setting and some kind of mandatory academic counseling for struggling students. And kind of throughout those 3 different strands of professional work, I heard a lot of recurring themes from the folks I was working with, just about some of the struggles and challenges they were going through. Some of the ways that they sort of saw the world and opportunities for the future and that sort of thing. So really kind of got my interest in this topic a little bit more kind of firmed up and crystallized. I'll also share that there are a few ways where I have kind of personal experience with this topic as well. I identify as a millennial. I think I'm kind of right on the verge of kind of in between Generation X and the millennial generation. One of the things I'm going to be talking about today is emerging adulthood, which is sort of a theory of development for millennials and Generation Z. And also I'm somebody who has a diagnosed mental illness, and mental illness that cropped up quite a bit during my college years and really sort of, you know, showed up in that process at various points in time, and sometimes in pretty significant ways. And so when I'm talking today, sometimes I'll be sharing information that comes from my research. Sometimes I'll be sharing information that comes from just kind of some of my previous and current experiences with college students. And sometimes I'll be sharing information that actually just kind of comes from my personal lived experience. So with that in mind, let's proceed. So in kind of getting started framing the issue of mental health for college students, there are a number of what I would consider to be pretty alarming trends that we see regarding college student mental health really over the last several decades. Multiple sources have shown that rates of depression and anxiety have gone up significantly since the 1980s. And in fact, the American College Health Association puts that figure at having more than doubled since that time. As you can see in the second bullet point there, this was a pretty large cohort study of about 100,000 college students that showed that in the 10-year period since 2007 and going to 2017, that the percentage of college students who sought treatment for some sort of distress or mental health related symptoms almost doubled. It went from 19% to 34%. And that the prevalence of college students who have previously been diagnosed with a mental illness increased by about 50%, from 22% of all students to 36% of all students. Those are some really, really huge spikes, in a relatively short time frame. And then also we see the last point that suicide rates among young adults have risen by about 50% in kind of that roughly same period of time. There's been a whole host of research done kind of with directors and employees at college counseling centers that over this kind of the same time frame, where those folks report that the nature of the services they offer have really changed a lot too, kind of going from more sort of traditional counseling approaches to a lot more kind of crisis response and preparing for people to come in kind of in really significant, and acute points of need. So there's been a lot of changes in students and also quite a bit of changes in terms of the services that colleges and universities provide also. So it kind of begs the question, why are these trends the way that they are? Why is it that mental health has been in such decline on college campuses? And I think there's really a whole host of reasons. It's probably a little too simplistic to kind of pin it down on one specific reason. And actually, some of the reasons are positive. Arguably, I think, and research bears this out, that there is probably less stigma today about mental illness than there has been previously. That's certainly not to say that there's no stigma. I think stigma about mental distress and mental illness definitely still exists. And yet kind of the idea of going to seek help or going to talk to a counselor if you need to is a lot more of an accepted idea nowadays than it was perhaps in, say, the 1980s or even the 1990s. There's also been a lot more funding for college counseling services and outreach for getting students to kind of access those services. So again, a couple of these reasons are positive. We see more people seeking treatment and getting diagnosed because there are more sort of avenues to support people with mental illness and that sort of thing. But some of the reasons, and I would say that there are some researchers that attribute these trends entirely to those reasons, and we'll say like 100% of the reason why we see more students with diagnosed mental illness is because there's better diagnosis out there and there's better resources out there. That's certainly not the primary take, I suppose, among the research community, though. We definitely see, just across society as a whole, some pretty significant trends toward being more stressed and having less happiness and overall well-being, which is concerning. And so that might suggest that perhaps some of the trends we see for college students today really are just kind of a microcosm of a larger societal trend. But one thing that's definitely different about college students today, and of course there are a whole host of age ranges in college students, but traditional age college students are, of course, millennials and to a growing extent Generation Z. And I think, and this is kind of where my research comes in, there's some substantial differences in the characteristics of people who identify, as being part of one of those generations compared to previous generations. And so we're going to talk about some of those, but I think, millennials and folks from Generation Z tend to place a lot higher importance on academic achievement than have kind of past generations. And so they might feel more pressure to succeed in college. Of course, they're navigating the college experience in an incredibly complex and ever-changing society that continues to be revolutionized by technology and social media, the political climate, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a lot of unique factors about kind of the cohorts of students that we have today that could be part of this as well. Maybe somewhat related to that, the college experience contains a number of major life transitions. When you think about kind of the process of going from being an adolescent who lives at home and perhaps growing in independence, but still is supported and sustained by perhaps parents or caregivers. The transition from going from that to a college environment where now you're sort of expected to be autonomous and kind of be able to make it on your own, afford food and that sort of thing. There are major changes and transitions that come with that experience. And with transitions come changes in how we view ourselves, changes in maybe perhaps how capable we feel of being able to navigate those changes and transitions. And then that's just really the first year college experience. Kind of throughout college, there are a whole host of other transitions we experience. Of course, there's the senior year transition for folks who persist through and graduate, where we are kind of, preparing to transition out of college and think about what we want career-wise, that sort of thing. And then another trend that we see in research is that there seems to be an increased prevalence of what I would consider to be risky coping behaviors, perhaps including coping with substances, coping with sort of impulsive or other kinds of like reckless behaviors, which might kind of be effective for distress sort of in the immediate moment, but then kind of come with other consequences down the road, which can kind of compound themselves. So those are just a few reasons for the trends. And I wonder, one of the kind of first places where I wanted to stop and check in with the audience is just what other reasons do you think there might be for some of these trends? So I want to just kind of pause and give folks a minute to type some thoughts that they might have. And then maybe Anna and I could read through those out loud together. So what are some reasons you think that we see these trends in declining mental health among college students, kind of other than what's listed here? So I'll take a second and kind of see what you come up with.
Joel, I have a trend that something I just, as a college student myself, in a grad program, is that with social media, there's a lot of instances where people, Carol mentioned social media as well. So there's social media, there's this great opportunity to compare yourself to others. And on social media, it's really easy to show all the good parts of life and not the hard parts. So I think that's a huge stressor on college students and young people today.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really interesting about research on social media and the mental health implications for college students is that it's pretty split. There's quite a bit of research out there that talks about ways that social media can really be an aid to mental health and well-being. it helps us feel more connected to people. There tend to be, if you think about Facebook, there tend to be specific groups or communities that are specific maybe to a particular life experience you've gone through or something, unique to your lived experience. So social media provides all sorts of avenues for social support, which can be, monumentally helpful. And yet, as you were saying, Anna, it also provides a lot of opportunities for comparison, for maybe kind of feeling a need to put a version, like sort of the best version of our lives out there. Certainly, it provides avenues for cyberbullying. So the effect of social media on mental health in the college years, I think, is quite complicated, and I think includes some protective factors and also some significant risk factors, as you were saying.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I see somebody else wrote social media. I wonder if there are any other thoughts on this before we keep moving. Maybe I'll just kind of keep going, and then if anybody has any that they want to add, you feel free to. Let's see. Lack of resilience based on the way Generation Z has been raised. Yeah, I definitely hear that a lot. The cost of school, increased student debt. I would say other kinds of economic inequalities leading to food insecurity and other types of economic insecurities definitely are important as well. And then I see somebody wrote, do I think families come into play? And absolutely I do. In fact, one of the major kind of strands of research that I do for college student mental health is the effect of things like attachment and ego strength and resilience, and factors that aren't necessarily like internal traits, but are things that we know to be heavily influenced by kind of upbringing and the home environment and the number of adverse childhood experiences that one encounters. So absolutely, I think families and really society do come into play. And then, kind of echoing that, I see Emily just wrote the current political landscape, which yes, absolutely is affecting mental health. That's something I know at Portland State we've seen a great deal of, just people feeling unsafe or experiencing more maybe identity-based bullying or that sort of thing, kind of in this current political climate that maybe they feel like is increased over kind of previous years. So thank you all for chiming in. I'm going to ask you to do that again at some point. So thanks for participating, and be ready to do some more of that. Oh, and then here's one more comment: preparedness, particularly around issues relating to being a first-generation student. Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing college campuses trying to recruit more students that have underrepresented or historically minoritized identities. And so with that, we are going to have more and more first generation college students. And there is a wealth of research about the unique difficulties that first generation students experience that others maybe don't necessarily have to. I know I was a first generation college student, and I wasn't really aware of that terminology at the time, but some things that I noticed that were kind of different about my college experience compared to those of my friends were just kind of, maybe having this sense or this feeling like I sort of, like they had a little bit more of this kind of head start in terms of how to survive and thrive and, provide for themselves and that sort of thing. There were often times where I felt like I was kind of, meandering aimlessly trying to kind of figure those things out for myself. So yeah, I think first generation college students definitely face some unique and additional difficulties. So thank you all for your wonderful and insightful comments. So as we keep moving, one of the things I mentioned was just kind of generational differences. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about today's college students in the context of sort of generational differences. So there's a theory of emerging adulthood And that this is, as Anna mentioned, a big facet of the research that I conduct. So emerging adulthood is an idea about how essentially 20-somethings today kind of see the world and engage with the world, and perhaps how 20-somethings today might be different compared to those of previous generations. So there are a whole host of, I would say, societal expectations that we maybe have without even kind of realizing that we have for people in their 20s that seem like they are less relevant or less accurate today than maybe they have been in the past. The theory of emerging adulthood says is that 18 to 29-year-olds today are much more likely to express that they don't really feel like adults, but they also don't feel like adolescents. They kind of feel like they're in between adolescence and adulthood. And emerging adulthood kind of says that we might have the sort of the freedom and autonomy that comes with adulthood, but in many ways other sorts of developmental trajectories that are consistent with adolescence. And so it's, folks in this age range are often left kind of feeling very in between while navigating a world that sees a 20-something and kind of expects them to feel and act like an adult. With emerging adulthood comes also this prolonged period of identity exploration. I think we're seeing young adults today take a lot more time to really thoughtfully consider who they want to be in life and what they want out of life, be it with career, be it with romantic partners, other aspects of identity. So with that comes perhaps more of an enhanced kind of focus on the self, which I think a lot of people have characterized or maybe mischaracterized as increases in entitlement or narcissism. I know those are two big buzzwords that we see prop up with kind of millennials, especially today. And actually, the theory of emerging adulthood just says that's actually pretty normative, because it's this time where we are engaging in thinking about who we want to be and what we want out of life. And so it makes a lot of sense that we would be, internally focused while doing that. Emerging adults also have a significant amount of demographic instability with respect to prior generations. It's quite common for emerging adults to kind of leave the home and return home multiple times, especially, in the college years, even kind of like when there are, like summer breaks and that sort of thing. And then emerging adults today also have really strong kind of pro-social values and seem to report this sense of kind of connectedness and understanding about the importance of community engagement and activism, and that sort of thing. So with emerging adulthood, really, the reason why this has kind of been brought about is all of the different sorts of kind of societal evolution that's taken place in the latter half of the 20th century and in the early parts of the 21st century. Some of that social media and kind of the proliferation of technology, which has allowed us to be more connected, kind of see how other people are living their lives. But, for whatever reason, kind of life goals that we would traditionally associate with, say a 25-year-old just don't really seem like they make, are that as applicable anymore. When you look at kind of the chart at the bottom, this is data from the US Census Bureau. Over about a 40-year period from 1970 until 2012, the average age of marriage and the average age of having a first child went up by 4 to 6 years across the US. And so with that, I think comes some pretty significant other changes. If we are not kind of tied down or needing to care for a family at the same time that maybe a previous 20-something was, then that really frees us up to do a lot more of that identity exploration and those sorts of activities that are more consistent with being an emerging adult. And so it, you know, kind of creates this period of life that is just kind of, you know, unique from adolescence and definitely distinct from adulthood. And nevertheless, kind of, you know, emerging adults are in college and being acted on by the expectations of sort of, you know, maybe perhaps outdated models of thinking, I guess. So I want to kind of dig into this a little bit more, some of the societal attitudes about emerging adults today, and kind of think about some of the internalized messages maybe that today's college students might be receiving from society. And so what I want to do is just kind of show you a series of images, and then I'm going to pause at the end and give folks a chance to just, you can type out a little bit about what your reactions are to seeing those images, or how they kind of sit with you, or how they impact you, just to kind of get a sense for how this could be a pretty significant phenomenon in terms of college student mental health. I'm going to scroll through these images and maybe kind of read them to you, and then I'll pause for a second to give you a chance to type out your thoughts. So here we have a Time magazine cover from, I believe, 2005 about, this is kind of before we had the terminology of millennials per se, saying they just won't grow up. We have a book by Jean Twenge, who is considered one of the foremost researchers on the millennial generation, though she certainly takes a different approach to researching millennials than I do. So here we see her book, Generation Me. Not everyone gets a trophy. And this is specifically about Generation Y, which is another term for the millennial generation. Here we have a meme. I'm afraid of a world run by adults who were never spanked as kids and got trophies just for participating. And then another Time magazine cover. Time magazine really loves this topic, apparently. The me generation, where it says millennials are lazy, entitled narcissists who still live with their parents. And of course, there's that part about why they'll save us all. And here's the dumbest generation. And then a few quotes. Compared to previous generations, oops, sorry, my screen went away. There we go. Compared to recent generations, recent high school graduates are more likely to want lots of money. I'm sorry, I keep on losing my screen here. Let me go back to that. There we go. Want lots of money and nice things, but less likely to say they're willing to work hard to earn them. We are raising a generation of deluded narcissists. That's very, very to the point, isn't it? And then last but not least, from that Time magazine article, not only do millennials lack the kind of empathy that allows them to feel concern for others, but they have trouble even intellectually understanding other points of view. So at this point, I want to turn it over to you all, just kind of get some of your comments about how you're reacting, or how you're sitting with some of those images and book titles and quotes. What comes up for you when you see those? Lydia says it's a bit scary. I wonder if it's scary in terms of feeling like those are accurate, or scary just in terms of how that's how society is thinking about that generation of people. Yeah, harsh and demeaning. Yes, definitely. There are misconceptions about the generations. Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think definitely a lot of overgeneralizing. Perhaps there are data points or reasons why the authors of these articles and books kind of are seeing changes and responding in the way that they are, but they seem to be doing so with this very broad brush, very simplistic way of interpreting the challenges millennials face, right? And that, I think, is a key issue. Chris, thanks for bringing that up. That there's a whole host of research that shows that millennials experience challenges today that perhaps were not part of the picture or the equation in previous cohorts of young adults, where life just seems to be a lot more complex and complicated. Of course, I'm saying that as a millennial, somebody who has lived experience. So my bias, I think, needs to be acknowledged there. But nevertheless, I do think that there is some research to back up that idea too. So anyway, thanks for kind of humoring me in that little experiment of looking at those different images. I really believe that the kind of attitudes that society shows toward millennials and Generation Z have a big impact, and this is something that I have kind of found to bear out in my research, where people will talk about kind of feeling maybe lost or like they're trying to find their way, and like that's hard enough as it is without also hearing from relatives or seeing something on the news that kind of paints in this very overgeneralized way what it means to be a millennial. I believe that can lead to internalized beliefs that can be harmful and in some ways sort of like self-reinforcing. Oh, and here's a comment from Yannette. Working at College of Western Idaho as a mental health counselor, when I see these images, I think of societal pressures, competition, and misconception. Yeah, that's, I think, a really great way to put it. Thank you, Yannette. Okay. So kind of speaking to that idea of there being more pressures today than perhaps in previous generations, here are just some of the trends that we see in the college experience today that, kind of with respect to, previous years or previous decades and generations. Like I said earlier, millennials and Generation Z tends to place a lot more pressure on academic achievement. It's much more likely for college students today to pursue graduate degrees, and sort of with that comes a lot more student debt, significantly more student debt among today's students than those in prior generations. I know that was a comment that somebody brought up earlier. There's more career turnover and more post-college underemployment. So underemployment just refers to folks who are either unemployed or are employed in a field that doesn't require a college degree. And for folks between the ages of 22 and 27 with a college degree, 40% today are underemployed. So there are, again, multiple factors that make college a more kind of pressure-filled experience than perhaps we're used to seeing. And I think that higher educators and college personnel are really grappling with how to respond to that, how to be, kind of most helpful with that. I mentioned the life transitions and how kind of, adjusting to college life and then adjusting to the transition out of college can be these really significant transition points in young adulthood. And I think that those are especially true for certain populations, especially first generation students who maybe didn't have kind of a previous template for what kind of navigating college looks like. International students, we see a lot of research about how those transition points can be especially difficult for those folks. And then other students with various minoritized identities. I use the word minoritized to refer to students of color, students maybe with kind of different ethnic identities than the dominant culture, and then other sorts of identities, people who identify as LGBTQ, people with disability, those sorts of things. Anything that's sort of different or historically marginalized or underrepresented in the dominant culture. In emerging adulthood, the problem of the distress that comes from life transitions is especially problematic because risky coping behaviors are highest among emerging adults. So college students are experiencing more stress and transition, and they are at a point in their life where they're more likely to respond to stress and transition in ways that perhaps are maladaptive or problematic. For example, binge drinking, drug use, driving while under the influence, that sort of thing. And then also just the college years are a time when most of the diagnosable mental illnesses have kind of their most common age of onset during this period of life. So it's this very critical period for mental health and well-being, and for stress and distress. And it's happening at a time when people are feeling more pressure from the college experience, and again, are more likely to respond in ways that might kind of exacerbate those stressors rather than adequately alleviate them. So at this point, I want to kind of just switch gears and talk about some things that are research informed and evidence based that college students can do to promote positive mental health. We'll talk a little bit about resilience, and I also just want to share some ideas for, if you're a college student, when you might know it's time to seek help for yourself, and how you might be able to recognize that in other people. So first of all, strategies for positive mental health and well-being. I think the first thing, and one of the really significant ones, is just cultivating self-kindness and compassion. I know that this, some people, when I talk about self-kindness and self-compassion, will maybe kind of roll their eyes and feel like it's a little of a new agey concept or something like that. But something I would talk about a lot with my clients as a counselor was just sort of an idea that everybody is deserving of kindness, and that I believe that we are all deserving of the same kindness we would extend to somebody we care about experiencing the things that we're going through. So for college students, what I really encourage folks to do is, if there's something that you are feeling down about, or feeling perhaps bad about, or something like that, to just kind of try to do a little bit of a thought experiment where you picture somebody that you care about going through the same thing, and try to picture yourself responding to that person. What would you be saying? How would you be trying to support them? And then maybe kind of just compare and contrast the difference in how you would be saying or supporting somebody else, and how you are talking to yourself about that very same thing. Physical activity is incredibly important for mental health and well-being, though I do want to just offer a little bit of a caveat here, that sometimes if people are already experiencing mental distress, or perhaps symptoms of mental illness, the symptoms themselves can interfere with our feeling of being able to engage in physical activity. So it can almost kind of become this this compounded problem. For example, if somebody is experiencing a major depressive episode, they're likely to have feelings of maybe being lethargic, or not having much motivation, not feeling like pleasurable activities have the same amount of kind of joy attached to them, and that sort of thing. So it can almost become negatively reinforcing to try to really encourage somebody in a depressive episode to just go work out more, or go be physically active, because it's sort of like, I know that's the thing I need to do, and yet I don't feel able to do it, and so it can kind of lead to this compounded problem. So I see physical activity as being really, really, really effective as a preventative measure, and definitely can be helpful for folks who are experiencing some significant distress, though it can also lead to perhaps reinforcing some of that distress by being overly encouraging of people kind of doing that when they're already in the throes of mental distress. Getting good sleep is incredibly important. Probably don't need to say too much more about that. Another strategy that has a whole host of empirical evidence supporting it is engaging in intentional relaxation activities. So quieting your mind through things like meditation, mindfulness, which is just a word that describes sort of a type of meditation that's really geared toward or focused on turning your attention to your five senses and quieting your other thoughts that you might have that kind of just roll through our heads without even maybe noticing them. And for some people, prayer can be really effective for this type of thing as well. Setting realistic goals is incredibly important. I don't know how many times when I would be working with young adults who were experiencing distress, they would have these plans for how they were going to turn their situations around that very often were like, well, I'm getting D's and E's currently, so I'm going to study for 5 hours a day, and that way I'll get A's and B's. And well, that's great, and certainly if you feel like you can be successful doing that, that's wonderful. Though I would maybe worry a little bit about life balance at that point. But helping folks kind of think about ways to set realistic goals that are specific and measurable and achievable. We'll set them up for feeling the success that comes with achieving goals, and not kind of having that continued experience of setting a goal for myself and then not fulfilling it or living up to it. And then last but certainly not least is just help seeking, getting help if you feel like you are struggling, and then also just seeking support from other people. Maybe it's from your friends, maybe it's from your family members. I know there are a lot of college students who feel very isolated from their family and even from peer groups. And maybe there are other ways of sort of finding your community, so to speak. Maybe it's kind of looking for other people who have a shared interest that you have, or joining an extracurricular club, or that sort of thing. But there's a lot of research that shows that the more supported we feel, and the more folks we have in our lives who can accept us for who we are, the better able we are to be resilient in the face of stress and distress. Speaking of resilience, I kind of wanted to talk about this for a couple of minutes here, because it is an incredibly important concept in college student mental health. I define resilience as a set of learned behaviors that help us cope with and adapt to adversity. Something I really want to mention here and point out is that resilience is not a personality characteristic. I think it's often thought about in that way, as sort of like this innate quality that some people have and others don't. And I worry that thinking can run the risk of perhaps being somewhat victim blaming for people who perhaps don't always respond in a resilient way. So I like to think of resilience as an outcome, or something that is comes from learned behaviors, because that communicates, I think, that we can all cultivate resilience. And really, I think we all are resilient already, because we've, if you faced any type of adversity, you have had to be resilient. And so the idea is just how we can kind of maximize that. And then also that resilience can be needed, or there could be opportunities for resilience across what we call ecological systems. It's sort of it's called the Bronfenbrenner model, where we are engaging in life in the world across different systems. There's the individual level, so you might have adversity that comes in the form of challenges with mental health systems. You might have adversity that comes in the microsystem, so maybe it's coming from family dynamics or academic challenges. And then it kind of broadens out across systems, where maybe you're experiencing challenges that are more societal. Perhaps you're part of a group or population where there are discriminatory laws that currently exist, or that there are societal beliefs that are harmful for you. So there are multiple dimensions across which we can be resilient and practice resilience. Some strategies for resilience, you might recognize a few of these. They're similar to the strategies for positive mental health, but again, finding your community, finding a group of people who understand you and accept you for who you are, I think is incredibly important. And I know on college campuses today, there is a growing trend toward safe spaces that are community specific. And I would encourage folks to seek those out if you belong to a community that has a safe space on campus. I think the more you can know your specific strength, but also know kind of when your buttons are being pushed, so to speak, that can be really helpful for resilience. So you're cultivating self-awareness. Knowing what our specific strengths are means that we can kind of lean on them in times of need, and also know when maybe our strengths aren't going to be well suited for a challenge we're facing. So that could be an important reason to seek some help. This next one, relax, explore, and trust yourself, which is again evidence-based. When we are experiencing stress, being able to really focus on quieting our process, being able to focus on kind of thinking about possible opportunities, and then not doubting yourself are all crucially important toward being resilient. And I know sometimes it's easier said than done, but with practice, I think can become a lot more doable and attainable. Finding ways just to feel hope for the future. I think for people with mental illness, sometimes this can be incredibly difficult. There are some mental illnesses, for example, post-traumatic stress disorder, where the actual symptoms themselves can make it difficult to feel hopeful about the future, or really even to think about the future at all. And nevertheless, if we can find even just little things that we're looking forward to in our week or our month, or 5 years down the road, all of those can really have a pretty positive impact. Serving others, getting involved in your community, getting engaged, maybe in activism or volunteering for others, can be an effective way of coping with the stress and having resilience. And then just this last point, I alluded to this already, but the idea of resilience being a learned set of behaviors that nevertheless can look like they're more like an internal trait, means that for some folks we might have to practice it more in order for it to really feel internalized or feel like this automatic process. And I know for myself, when I've encountered mental health challenges, it can be really difficult to sort of feel like it's kind of like the fake it till you make it approach, where I might be trying to engage in some of these behaviors, not really necessarily feeling them help in the moment. And it can be really difficult just not to give up sometimes on a particular strategy. And yet, kind of persevering and persisting and continuing to use that strategy is what is going to make it effective down the road. So that is a significant challenge, and don't give up. When and how to seek help. So I have a few potential warning signs that, if you notice these types of things happening for you, this could be a really good indication that it's time to seek help. If you notice changes in your academic performance, if you notice that you've been feeling down lately or feeling depressed, mood swings, which, if you feel like you're having these really big fluctuations in feeling great one moment and then feeling really down the next. If you notice yourself having feelings of hopelessness, that could be a really good indication that it's time to seek some help. If you notice yourself not taking care of yourself, from a hygiene or personal appearance perspective as much as you normally do. If you notice your substance use increasing or other types of risk-taking behaviors increasing, that could be a good indication. If you notice having more thoughts about death, especially thoughts about suicide. And then if you're having any type of sleep problems that seem to be persisting, for some folks that might mean having trouble falling asleep, and for other folks it might mean that you fall asleep just fine, but then you notice yourself waking up and having trouble falling asleep again in the middle of the night. Um, know that there are, on most college and university campuses, a wide range of supports for people who are struggling, including, I think, virtually all campuses today will have some kind of a college counseling center that usually is either no cost or low cost for students. If you're experiencing mental distress that is resulting in academic challenges, it could be incredibly helpful to go to an academic advisor or get some academic counseling. There are, supports that you might not even be aware of that exist for you, including accommodations, perhaps through like a disability support center. Sometimes people find it helpful to just kind of take a little bit of a break from college for, a term until they're feeling better, and that's something that an academic advisor could help you with. There are career support services and financial support services if those are sources of distress for you. You're worried about kind of what career is going to look like after graduation. And then, as I mentioned before, there are community-specific spaces oftentimes on campuses, maybe for students of color, for students who identify as a gender or sexual minority, that kind of thing. And if you want to get connected to those types of campus resources, you can go to an academic advisor for that. You can also talk with your professors about that. And that's something that maybe students are reluctant to do for various reasons. But just know that professors are folks who can connect you with resources that you might find helpful, and oftentimes will know about more resources just as a function of their job duties. And then also you can, if you're struggling and you need help and you're not sure kind of where to turn, just going to the university website and searching for college counseling or career support or something like that will usually kind of point you in the right direction. Last but not least, how to be supportive for peers. So maybe just like looking for signs or how to be a helpful presence for people that you know who might be in distress. So first of all, just kind of looking for the same warning signs that I mentioned for you to be kind of watching out for in yourself. But I think it's really important for peers to be checking in. If you have a friend who struggles with mental illness, it can be incredibly helpful, and sometimes even the difference between life and death, to check in with those folks on a regular basis and not just assume that they'll let you know if they're struggling or need help. I know from the clients I worked with, and also just kind of from my own lived experience, that when people are struggling, there are specific kind of symptoms at play that can make it hard to ask for help. And so when other people can kind of, check in and say, hey, how are you doing? Are you struggling? Are you doing okay? That can make all the difference in the world sometimes. I think it can be a really good idea to offer kind of like specific ways that you can be helpful to a peer, rather than saying something like, how can I help you? Or let me know if there's anything you need. If you can offer something specific, like here, like the example here, I brought you some water, or how about we go watch a movie together tonight and get your mind off of, school or work or whatever it might be. Offering those specific supports, I think, can be really helpful, because again, there are numerous symptoms of mental illness that can make it difficult to even kind of generate ideas for what would feel useful or helpful. I think in general, avoiding trying to offer solutions to problems is a good thing. Sometimes it can be helpful, but other times it can maybe feel, somewhat demeaning, or suggest that, all of this stress and distress that somebody is feeling has this like easy solution that they just haven't thought of before. So it can kind of end up communicating a negative message, even if the idea itself is helpful. Next up, I have this acronym called LOVE, which stands for Listen, Understand, and Validate, which I think is a kind of a good formula for how to be a supportive presence for somebody who is needing help. And then, just like I mentioned, encouraging, help seeking for you when you're struggling, encouraging others to seek help and get treatment is important too. So just to summary, we talked about some kind of statistics related to the college student mental health crisis. We talked about some of the contributing factors, which are like the differences in the college experience, differences in generations of folks who are now attending college, some of the life transitions that are associated with that. And we talked about a few strategies for mental health and resilience, and that is really it in terms of content. So I would be happy to take any questions at this point that anybody might have. Oh, I see a few comments that I missed. Let's see, we get quite a few college students coming into our crisis center to talk. Interestingly, most of them are already in counseling at the college. Yeah, so that's talking, you know, I think is something I was mentioning earlier, just about how more services or more college counseling centers are needing to provide kind of that triage crisis assistance and support rather than kind of like more traditional outpatient counseling. So yeah, thanks for that comment. Yeah, other questions or comments?
Hi.
So here's one. What are some unique ways you've seen campuses encourage or support students building protective factors? Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that there are a lot of differences from one campus to the next in how this can be actualized. I know here at Portland State University, there's been a lot of energy put into community spaces that feel safe for folks. So we have a Native American student center, and there's a queer resource center, and places like that where people can just go and find their community, essentially. I know that's been one of the big initiatives here at Portland State. And here's another question. Would you put the how to be supportive slide back up, please? Yes, I'd be happy to.
And then there's one question above that. I don't think you might have just answered it, but it was about specific ways campuses are encouraging self-exploration and self-trust from Emily.
Oh, okay. That's a good question. I would say that that's something that is happening in college counseling. I also see this trend really across a wide range of college campuses, having more courses that are, or more course offerings that are related to like the first year experience. So it'll be, you know, something that freshmen could take where it's as much about building life skills and kind of internal positive coping resources as it is about, you know, kind of study habits and that sort of thing, but kind of just, you know, like introducing curriculum that actually helps people build some of these coping strategies and resources that will then help them thrive later on in the college experience. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other questions for Dr. Lane at this time? If you do have any questions, I'm sure he'd be more than happy. If you want to email me, I can chat with him and get back to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to thank Dr. Lane so much for joining us today. That was super interesting. I really love the piece about resilience and kind of your definition of what that means. We might have to talk more about that later, actually, about using that. Additionally, I'm putting the Empower Idaho newsletter sign up in the chat box if you want to hear more about future webinars, kind of like this one we had today, always free. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me. And yeah, I just want to thank you again, Dr. Lane. That was awesome.
Oh, thanks. My pleasure.
Yeah, so anyway, I guess on that note, we may wrap it up. Just thanks all again, and I will be seeing you guys at our next webinar. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Dr.